AI coding agents are getting better and better every day, but sometimes it feels like there are too many options to choose from. Today, I'll be doing a deep dive into two of the most popular AI coding agents, Codex and Claude Code, and challenging them both to create their best version of this personal finance app. My main determining factor for the winner of the challenge will be code quality. I'll measure this by looking at things like readability, organization, duplication, documentation, and coupling, just to name a few. As a developer, for me, the clear winner of this challenge will be the agent that produces the most correct code while also producing a solution that is maintainable and easy for human developers to work with. But without let's hop into the challenge. So for this challenge, we're going to be using this design from Frontend Mentor. For each of these projects, I've created a basic Nest.js app for us to start building off of. I've gone ahead and dropped the prompt into Claude Code, and I'm going to go ahead and hit submit and time how long it's going to take us to get a fully working version without any bugs or any issues that uses all of the features that we have listed on the website. So on 3, 2, 1. All right, it's started, so let's see what it gets.
A few moments later.
Alright, so it took about 10 minutes and 30 seconds for us to get this whole app up and running. That's with us debugging a couple of errors that we found along the way. So let's take a look at what it looks like. Alright, so it's not too bad so far. It's not exactly the design that we sent to it, but it's pretty close. Let's try and play around with it and see if it's working as expected. Okay, it does work, it navigates. If I try to, let's say, add some money, I add $100 here, does that work? Okay, that does work. Awesome. If I withdraw $50, does that work? That does work. That's amazing. If I add a new pot, let's say down payment, and let's say $20,000. Current amount is 0, and pick a color. All right, so there is a little bug here where I can't pick a color, so that's something to note. So I guess we have to go with, and it gives it no color, so that is one bug that we found. All right, so looking at some of these files here, it looks like each of these folders here have an individual page file, which, corresponds to that view that we see for each of the files there, which is great because it, definitely is organized in that sense. One thing I'm not a huge fan of is just sort of the length of these files. For instance, this pots page, we get to, line 165 before we actually start, with the actual UI display of what's going on there. So I'm not a huge fan of that. I will say though that the way that they've defined functions, handle, submit, add pot, update pot, add money to pot, it is very human readable. So I do appreciate that, rather than, some sort of obscure function name that just uses variables that is hard for a human to then go back and make changes to, edit, or reuse in other places. So looking at this, it does look like they use different components here. So for instance, we have pot card, which is in this components folder here. So it's created a sort of separate components folder and put these sort of reusable components here, which is great to see because we don't want to be sort of rinsing and repeating so many times, because for our data we have a lot of pots and we just want to map through it and use that. So that's great. However, I do feel like we maybe have not fully exhausted the ability to be dry and not repeat ourselves, because for instance, this text field probably could be something that could be its own component as well. So I do think this file could still be cleaned up a little bit and just made a little bit more succinct. As I said, we're kind of getting on over 300 lines of code here. So it'd be great to see either this file, this pots page, broken into multiple files, or just using additional smaller components in order to keep it human readable. And so let's hop over and see how Codex handled this exact same prompt. All right, so taking a look at the Codex application, we're going to provide it with the exact same prompt and see how it handles it.
One eternity later.
All right, so Codex is finally finished. It worked through all the errors. It took about 14 minutes and 29 seconds. So let's take a look at what Codex has built. All right, so taking a look at the app, it looks very different from our design that we provide here. And we provided the same files to both Claude Code and Codex. So it's interesting that this looks so different, where if you remember, the Claude Code version looks pretty bang on with the original. This looks very, very different. So that's a first interesting point. If we go do the same pots test, it has all of those pots there. If we try to add funds, I think I add some funds here. Oh, nothing happens. All right. Considering Codex has taken more time actually than Claude code to figure out how to do this, and it's not fully functional, not super great. Let's take a look at the actual code itself. Going through, and as I said, this one had a lot more bugs. I think I had to go through it at least 3 or 4 times and just work through all the bugs. Looking at the folder and file structure, it seems to have kept everything within the app folder, which is an interesting choice. When I'm working with Next.js, I tend to restrict which folders I nest within the app folder because of the built-in routing system that Next.js provides and optimizes for, which Codex actually completely ignores in favor of what I would call just a more cumbersome solution. Navigation list. All right, so it's sort of creating these smaller components, I guess, within the dashboard. I'm not a huge fan of this style just because it does nest a lot of stuff, and I said it makes it harder for us to reuse this. So say I wanted to have a page that was not the dashboard page that I wanted to have the navigation list on. Now I need to take this navigation list piece out and put it somewhere else. And again, a lot of these, the filter functions and things like that, I think these could really be in these utils folders and these util files to just really clean up the components here, because again, we're getting on what, almost 250 lines of code here, and I do think that eats into the ability for the code to actually be readable, so that's not really great for me. So we have Claude code on one hand and Codex on the other. Let's talk about the areas where they did well and the areas they didn't do so well. Number 1, readability. I think both Claude code and Codex could improve in this area by increasing the amount of documentation that they have just within the code itself, you know, adding additional comments and things of that nature. But I think they were both averagely readable. However, as far as organization goes, which is the next topic we'll look at, I think Claude code did a much better job at organizing the files and the components that it created for this project. Codex, on the other hand, put everything that was pertinent to one of the views for the personal finance app into the same file, which really creates an issue if we ever want to expand this application and use some of these smaller components outside of that particular view. So as far as organization and architecture goes, I'm definitely going to give this to Claude code. Duplication. I think they're probably about even on this topic. While I do think Claude code could have done a better job of avoiding duplication in a few areas, I do also think that Codex did a good job of using the map functionality in order to map through different things like transactions or different pots. So I think both could probably have an improved approach to this, where both could probably use separate components, but I think that kind of falls more into the organization, so I'm going to call this one a tie. Error handling. While working through the project with Claude code only stopped once or twice for errors, and it handled those fairly quickly and within, you know, a short amount of time. Codex, on the other hand, probably stopped about 5 or 6 times for different errors that were spun up as it was trying to code up the application, and those errors required a lot of involvement from me. I think Claude did a much better job of error handling than Codex did, just due to the volume of errors and the types of cases that were created just through the actual coding process itself. Design. I think it's pretty obvious that Claude is a clear winner for design here. Claude's design actually follows the images we provided to it and does a pretty accurate representation of the front-end mentor design. Codex, on the other hand, did not follow the design we provided to it. Structurally, it was quite similar, but in terms of it matching, it was definitely a different design with different colors. Which, if I'm looking for an AI coding agent to match something, to match a design I've created, I would go with Claude for that solution. And finally, the number one most important thing: does the code actually work? Well, Claude code, although there were 1 or 2 bugs that we saw when we were working through, the code pretty much worked as expected. Codex, on the other hand, built an approximation of what the application should do, but when it came to the finer grained details of being able to add transactions, edit transactions, things like that, none of those buttons were functional, and we were unable to actually work with the application itself. So which one would I go with? I think the choice is clear. I would go with Claude code if I decided to use an AI coding agent for my next project. It did a really great job recreating the design, being correct most of the time, and also the structure it used for the files and the folders was much, much, much better than what Codex provided. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. If you want to see more content, feel free to subscribe down below. And if you want to take a look at other AI coding tools, check out this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!